Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we continue with Part 12, The House of Wisdom, from the Adepts in the Eastern Esoteric Tradition, by Manly Palmer Hall, Part 4, The Mystics of Islam. The House of Wisdom. One of the most extraordinary of all secret societies arose in Egypt in the 10th century AD. The Caliph Abu Muhammad Abdullah claimed the caliphate because he was directly descended from Fatima, the daughter of the Prophet Muhammad. He broke away from the Abbasid dynasty and founded the Fatimite dynasty, establishing his throne at Cairo. The motives which impelled this bold action have never been adequately examined, but they must have been accepted by a considerable number of devout Muslims, or the new dynasty could not have survived. In light of later events, it would appear that the Caliph Abdullah was a man of more than average intellectual attainments. The principal college in Cairo, the Darul Hikmat, House of Science, was a distinguished center of learning, and to this the Caliph attached a grand lodge dedicated to the advancement of philosophical and esoteric doctrines. This was called the House of Wisdom, and here candidates for initiation into the mysteries of Ismailism were regularly instructed. The instructions, which took the form of philosophical conferences, were given twice weekly, and both men and women attended this school. Wearing white robes, the neophytes and disciples were seated around the Grand Prior, who read to them discourses approved by the Caliph, the Grand Master of the Order. Originally, Abdullah divided his system of initiation into 7 degrees. The teachings of Pythagoras, Plato, and Aristotle were included in the sacred curriculum, and aspirants advanced from one level of knowledge to another, only a few attaining to the ultimate teaching of the lodge. The principal historians of the House of Wisdom are Joseph von Hammer and Stanley Lane Poole, both of whom showed marked prejudice against Muslim mysticism in general and the House of Wisdom in particular. It is generally admitted, however, that the 7 basic degrees contributed to the nobility of character, and the teachings included in them were above reproach. The first degree was the longest and the most difficult, for it involved broad attainments in knowledge. The second degree imposed solemn obligations to the teacher and the imams, whom Makrisi describes as certain sacred beings or persons, the source of all knowledge, who appear at various times to preserve the holy doctrine. The higher members of the fraternity were actually adepts, the higher members of a spiritual government founded in the esoteric tradition of antiquity. The third degree gave the number of the holy imams as 7, and related this number to the 7 heavens, the 7 planets, the 7 musical sounds, and all the other septenaries familiar to students of ancient symbolic philosophy. The fourth degree described the 7 divine lawgivers, the apostles of God who had succeeded one another, beginning with Noah and Abraham. The fifth degree extended the secret knowledge to consider the 12 signs of the zodiac, taking up such matters as the 12 tribes of Israel and so forth. The sixth degree was essentially philosophical, with emphasis upon Plato, Aristotle, and Pythagoras. The seventh presented an Oriental mystical theology, including the doctrine of unity which the Sufis exhibited. This program of instruction followed broadly the form of the philosophic ladder of Plotinus, the Alexandrian Neoplatonist. The disciple advances systematically through the abstract branches of learning, always dear to the Eastern heart. And while modern educators might consider the subject matter irregular, there would be no cause to question the piety of this grand lodge. To the original 7 degrees, 2 additional phantom levels are said to have been added, and that the teaching of these completely destroyed the spirit and intent of the House of Wisdom. The initiate was required to reject all the knowledge he had previously learned and cultivate total atheism. We are required to assume that the Muslims who attended the House of Wisdom would ultimately consent to beliefs and policies totally inconsistent with the doctrines of Muhammad. The average Muslim is a good man, and the scholars, philosophers, and mystics of Islam would never have sanctioned, even for a moment, a system of instruction which would open the teachings of their prophet to condemnation and ridicule. The most reasonable assumption is that the so-called 8th and 9th degrees were a fabrication intended to discredit a secret society with a wide sphere of influence. There is a parallel in Europe in the falsifications invented to justify the condemnation of the Knights Templars. There is a reasonable possibility that the House of Wisdom may have practiced esoteric exercises, encouraged its members to detach themselves from worldly ambition and liberate their hearts and minds from the authority of tradition. The belief that material ambition is an illusion, worldly goods merely a burden upon the spirit, and extreme intellectualism a detriment to mystical insight, corresponded closely with the accepted teachings of the dervishes and the Sufis. The House of Wisdom could have been influenced by Far Eastern sects, which are known to have penetrated the area. In Farther Asia, Buddhism and several schools of Hindu mysticism were persecuted by ambitious rulers, because such ideals cannot be reconciled with tyranny. Instead of assuming, as Lane Poole did, that the House of Wisdom was attempting to destroy the religion of Islam, it may have been a valiant effort to restore the simple, moral, mystical tradition in Islam. It is known that the original code of the Prophet was being dangerously undermined by political conflicts over the caliphate or dissent of leadership from the Prophet. It was acknowledged that God was always represented in the material world by a spiritual leader called an imam. It had become apparent, however, that the dissent of the imams had been historically broken, and it seemed that the spiritual security of the faithful was endangered. To meet this emergency, a doctrine was formulated by which the imam, or spiritual leader, was not always visible but was nevertheless present as a concealed but all-powerful being. The hidden imam, who was a secret ruler of the inner destiny of the Muslim world, would reveal himself to his faithful followers when the proper time arose. Meanwhile, it was the duty of those of good faith not only to await his coming, but to strive to hasten this event by personal piety. The doctrine of the hidden imam must be zealously preached, for in this mysterious being all the secrets of the Most High were deposited and protected. It was proper that his missionaries should go forth, calling men to the truth, like prophets in the wilderness. As the concept of a coming world teacher is common to many religions, it cannot be held that this doctrine was essentially dangerous or heretical. If this is the teaching which the House of Wisdom is accused of promulgating, it would seem that this secret society was actually a group of religious and philosophical reformers who suffered the misfortune natural to such groups. To protect itself, the society therefore subjected its disciples to initiations and tests, bound them to secrecy concerning the ultimate objectives, and encouraged them to spread the teachings through the Muslim world, including Arabia, Mesopotamia, and North Africa. These missionaries were called da'is, and they were carefully trained to teach in a manner understandable to the levels of society which they sought to influence. To the uneducated, they presented their ideas in simple form, based almost entirely upon the accepted morality of the Quran. To this, they added only certain references to the coming of the Mahdi. For those more philosophically inclined, the groundwork of the concept was more carefully unfolded. These missionaries were accused of appealing to members of various religions, and this is quite possible. If they firmly believed that they were the custodians of an esoteric plan for the union of faiths, the overthrow of tyranny, and the final liberation of the human mind from ignorance and fear, they would certainly not pause at the boundary lines of creeds. To assume that these teachers were all guilty of a gigantic hypocrisy is merely to reveal personal intolerance. There is much to indicate that the broad program of the House of Wisdom reached Europe and influenced many progressive thinkers. It is believed to have assisted in the restoration of learning after the benightedness of the Dark Ages, becoming a center of arbitration for the disputes between Europe and Asia. It is suspected that the Florentine Academy of Lorenzo de' Medici was patterned after the Holy House of Cairo. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe, and comment. And if you can, please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.